Bill Pickett lived in Texas. His mama and his papa had been born in slavery, but now slavery was over and Bill had been born free. He lived right there on the edge of the Chisholm Trail. And that was just fine for Bill, because most any afternoon he could sit on the back fence in his yard and watch the cowboys driving cattle along the trail to the meat markets. That's all Bill wanted to be. That's all he dreamed about, was growing up to be a real cowboy. He had to go to school, of course, and every morning while he was walking to school, he could see cowboys working on the Chisholm Trail. One morning while he was on his way to school, he heard some kind of ruckus off in the weeds beyond the road. And so he put his books down and he walked down the path and looked out through some brambles, and he saw a cattle dog, a bulldog, chasing a little calf. The calf had run away from its mama, and the cowboys had sicked the dog onto that calf to try to get it back into the herd. That dog was running round and around that calf, nipping at its heels, but he couldn't get it turned in the right direction. And finally, the dog ran around in front of that calf, and with a flying leap, he jumped up and bit that little cow right in the mouth. Whar! Hung onto its bottom lip. And then the dog just drugged that calf by its bottom lip right back to the herd. Bill'd never seen such a thing before. He thought to himself, well, you don't see that every day, now do you? Sometime after that, when Bill was a little bit older, he was watching the cattlemen on the Chisholm Trail. There was about a half-grown cow, not a great big thing, but a pretty good-sized animal that had cut away from the herd, and the cowboys were trying to get it back in the right direction. They had their lariats out, and from horseback they were flinging the ropes around and trying to hook a rope around the neck of that cow, but it kept dodging them. They were getting more and more frustrated. Finally, Bill jumped up and he yelled out, "Hey, I could catch that cow for you." The men stopped their horses, pushed their hats back on their head. One of them said, "How you gonna catch it? You ain't got no rope." "I don't need one." "You ain't got no horse." "I don't need that either." "Fine. We're not doing so good. Go ahead and give it a try." Bill ran right over to that cow, grabbed her by the ears, jerked her head up, and did exactly what he'd seen that bulldog do. He bit her right smack in the mouth. Arrgh! When he had a hold of her good, he yelled to the cowboys, "Okay, I got her. She ain't going nowhere. She's not going anywhere. Come on, come put a rope around her neck." Those cowboys thought that boy was right foolish to bite a cow smack in the mouth. Good grief. When Bill saw how amazed they were that he'd do such a thing, he knew exactly what he was going to do. He was going to grow up to be a real live cowboy, and bulldogging cows was going to be his specialty. And sure enough, that's exactly what he did. By the time Bill became an adult, the West was pretty much settled. If you saw cowboys, it was usually in a Wild West show. And so that's what Bill did. He worked with the 101 Ranch Wild West show, run by the Miller brothers, Joe and Zach. He was one of the stars of the show. The show would travel all over the United States, and they would show folks how the West was won. There was bronco busting and bull riding, and some Indians traveled with the show, and they would act out one of the Indian wars. But Bill was known as the Dusky Demon because of his dark skin, and he was the champion Bulldogger. It was a great, great act. Spotlights would swirl around, they would turn a 1,000-pound steer loose in the arena, and then Bill would come charging in on his fine horse, a good little quarter horse named Spradley. He'd ride right up next to that steer, leap out of the saddle, grab that bull by the horns, yank its head up, and bite it right smack in the kisser. Then he'd throw his hands up overhead and the band would play ta-da! And Bill would fall to the ground and pull that bull over on the ground with him. And the crowd would cheer and clap. They had never seen anything like it before. Bill was having a great time as a showman, but his wife worried about his work. She feared for his safety. She would say, "Bill, you ought not do that. Why, one of those big bulls step on you, it would crush you to death. Not to mention those dangerously sharp horns. I dream terrible things. I dream that you're going to get killed. I wish you wouldn't do that." But Bill, he never seemed to worry about it. He would always shrug and say, whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen. He rode for the Queen of England when the show went to Europe. And then when the show traveled down to Mexico, Bill went along, and the Miller brothers, who ran the show, Joe and Zach, went to a Mexican cantina one night and probably had too many bottles of Mexican beer, and they got to bragging about their show, but the Mexicans weren't very impressed with this Wild West show. Mexicans had cowboys. Mexicans knew how to rope cattle. Mexicans had Indians in their territory. That wasn't anything special. So the Miller brothers started bragging about the dusky demon, the only bulldogger in the Western Hemisphere. They would say things like, "Wow, you Mexicans got matadors, men who fight bulls. They get all dressed up in their little pajama pants, and they get the big red cape, and they go out there flinging it around, and whoo, toro, toro. That ain't nothing. We got a cowboy in our show. He could take one of your Mexican bulls and bite it smack in the mouth." Oh. Now the Mexicans had been insulted. The matadors were the heroes of their culture. Every country is famous for something. The Germans are famous for strong athletes, and the English are famous for great speech makers, orators, and the Mexicans were famous for their bullfighters. And these men from the United States said that their cowboy could fight one of their best fighting bulls. No, it couldn't be done. No, he couldn't do what the matadors did. The matadors, that wasn't playing around in pajama pants. That was a dance with death. Those bulls were bred for meanness. They had long, sharp horns that were filed to needle points. Their hooves were equally sharp. If they stomped you, it'd cut you to ribbons. Finally, a bet was laid down. The Mexican men bet the Miller brothers 5,000 pesos that Bill Pickett, the dusky demon, could not fight one of their bulls. He didn't even have to bite it in the mouth. All he had to do was hold it for 5 minutes. If he could do that, he'd prove himself plenty brave, but it wasn't going to be done. That bull would rip him to shreds. Well, when the Miller brothers told Bill Pickett about their conversation, he took those Mexican men up on their bet, and he said, "I'll do it. I'll fight one of those bulls, and I'll show them what I can do." The bullfight was planned for December the 23rd, just 2 days before Christmas, in the Great Bull Arena of Mexico City. It was a huge place that would seat 25,000 people, and it was jam-packed full of fans. They were very excited. 2 days before the holiday, they were going to celebrate the birth of the baby Jesus and the death of a Negro cowboy named Bill Pickett. They knew what would happen. They'd seen it happen before. The bull would charge him, gore him with the horns, fling him about a bit, and then throw him to the ground and run him through. And they would see his blood spill into the dirt. The crowd was yelling and screaming and chanting. Bill was seated in the saddle on his good horse Spradley, waiting for them to turn the bull into the arena. Across the way, Bill saw somebody lift up a big black coffin. It had his name spelled out across the side. He remembered his wife's dreams. He turned to Joe Miller, one of the show bosses, and he said, If I was to get killed, you would take my body back to the States. You'd bury me deep in the earth so a coyote couldn't scratch my bones. Will you make that promise to me?" Mr. Miller looked at him and said, "You planning on getting killed?" "No, I ain't planning on getting killed. I'm just saying." Mr. Miller promised that he would take his body back to the States if he died. And then a gate opened on the far side of the arena, and the bull came charging in. Men had thrown firecrackers under the bull's legs to get him all riled up. The bull's name was Frijoles Chiquita, which means little beans. Doesn't sound particularly dangerous. He got the name because he had all of these little black dots on his rump that looked to the Mexicans like a bowl of black beans. But this bull was a killer. He had killed matadors, and they were waiting to see him kill Bill Pickett. Another gate opened, and Bill came charging in on his horse. He tried to get alongside the bull, but the bull was awfully smart. He kept spinning around and trying to stab the horse with a horn. Bill didn't want to sacrifice his best horse, but he soon realized there was no other way he was going to get close enough to get a hold on that bull. And so he held Spradley in really tight. And while the horse stood still, he let the bull charge. The bull sank its sharp horns right into the flank of the horse. Bill said you could hear that horse scream. It was the awfulest sound he had ever heard. But it gave him just a split second to leap out of the saddle, and when the bull extracted its horns, all covered in the horse's blood, Bill hooked his arms around those bull's horns and jerked its head up and did his best to get a bite right on its bottom lip. But the bull went nuts. It was shaking Bill up and down and back and forth and pounding him against the ground. It ran over to the wall and slammed him against the boards, but Bill held on. The clock was ticking. The bet was he just had to hold the bull for a full 5 minutes. The bull started banging its head into Bill's head. He knew if he didn't get that bull to stand still, he was going to get his head cracked open. All of a sudden he realized if he couldn't get a bite on it, he could do the next best thing. He pulled his knees up and stuffed them in the bull's nose. If he could plug up its air passages, he might cause that bull to suffocate and pass out. Sure enough, his plan was working. Soon the bull started to stagger and list to one side. He was going to cause that bull to fall over. When the Mexican people in the arena, all standing on their feet, saw that the bull was going to fall, they started to fight for the bull. They grabbed anything that wasn't bolted down and hurled it into the arena. One man threw in a seat cushion. That wasn't going to knock Bill off. Another man pulled off his cowboy boot and flung it into the arena and struck Bill on the head. Bill held on for all he was worth. The bull's horns were slick with the horse's blood, but he wasn't going to let go. The bull was still staggering along, and then somebody grabbed up a full bottle of beer. They hadn't even uncapped it, and they flung it like a football right at Bill, and when the missile struck his side, he heard something pop. It wasn't the glass breaking, it was 3 of his ribs. And when his ribs cracked, it caused a searing pain to shoot through his body, and he slipped off the bull's horns and fell to the ground. All the people in the Mexican arena froze like 25,000 statues. This was the moment they were waiting for. The bull backed up a few paces, pawed the ground, and charged Bill. Bill closed his eyes and gave his soul to God. He felt the bull's belly brush across his face, but somehow, it had to be a miracle, the bull had missed. It hadn't even stepped on him. You could see little trenches in the ground where it had dug its horns along on either side of Bill's body. As soon as the bull passed over him, Bill rolled out of the way and climbed over a wall to safety. He pointed to the clock. He had not held that bull for 5 minutes. In fact, he had held it for nearly 7.5 minutes. The man who was supposed to keep the official time said that his watch stuck. That's why he hadn't rung the bell. Likely story. But Bill had won his bet. He had held on to one of the worst and meanest fighting bulls in all of Mexico City. And so they paid him his 5,000 pesos. And then the president of Mexico gave Bill and the whole show a police escort to the border because he was afraid that the Mexicans might be so mad they might try to kill him. Bill went back to the United States, and not long after that, he retired from his work in the show. But by now, he had invented a new rodeo event called bulldogging. Today, cowboys call it steer wrestling. Most of them aren't brave enough to bite the bull smack in the kisser, but they all remember the dusky demon Bill Pickett. In fact, he was the first African-American cowboy admitted to the Cowboy Hall of Fame. And that's the end of that.